Welcome back to the Old West Tales, where every story whispers secrets of love, heartbreak, and redemption. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Drop your location in the comments. I'm curious which part of the world my viewers are from. Sit back and let me take you on a journey that might just melt your heart tonight. The whisper started the moment Abigail Carter walked into the general store in the small frontier town of Dry Creek, Kansas, her worn boots tapping against the wooden floorboards. She felt eyes following her every step and heard the rustle of dresses as the townswomen leaned together, lowering their voices to that special tone reserved for gossip and judgment. Marrying him? One woman said loudly enough to be heard. A poor widower with 3 little girls. What in heaven's name is she thinking? Desperate, I suppose. Another woman replied. At 32, her choices were running mighty thin. Abigail tightened her grip on the basket handle, but kept her head high, continuing down the aisle as though she had heard nothing at all. She had become accustomed to the rumors during the 6 months since she married Jacob Walker, though the words still stung like cactus needles against bare skin. Jacob was a quiet ranch hand, weathered by hardship and loss. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier, leaving him to raise 3 daughters alone. Charlotte, age 10, Rebecca, age 7, and little Annie, who was only 5. He worked wherever work could be found, repairing fences, fixing roofs, hauling supplies, and doing any honest labor that would put food on the table. They lived in a small, worn-down cabin on the edge of Dry Creek, and everyone knew Jacob struggled to make ends meet. When Jacob proposed to Abigail, kneeling beneath a cottonwood tree on the ranch where she worked for the wealthy Harrison family, she never hesitated. She had seen the kindness in his eyes, the tenderness in the way he spoke about his daughters, and the calluses on his hands that came from years of honest labor. Abigail had been alone since losing her parents, earning barely enough wages to survive. Long ago, she had stopped dreaming of the grand romances other young women chased. But she had not married Jacob out of desperation, no matter what the town believed. She married him because when he looked at her, she felt truly seen. And when she met his daughters, their young eyes aching for a mother's love, something inside her heart opened. "Did you hear?" Mrs. Whitmore's voice carried clearly across the store. "They're being thrown out." The landlord finally lost patience. "Where will they go?" another woman asked. "They've got no money and 4 mouths to feed." Abigail's heart sank. Jacob had tried to hide the eviction notice from her, but she had found it tucked inside his coat pocket the night before. They had only 2 weeks left to find another place to live. She finished her shopping quickly, ignoring the sympathetic glances and knowing smiles, then hurried home. Home. The word still felt strange, even after 6 months. The cabin might have been falling apart. Rain leaked through the roof during storms. The walls creaked whenever the prairie wind blew. Yet it was filled with laughter and love in a way Abigail had never known before. When she arrived, she found Jacob standing in the small yard, staring down at something in his hands. The girls were away at school, making the property feel unusually quiet. "Jacob?" She set down her basket and walked toward him. He looked up. For the first time since she had known him, she saw tears in his eyes. In his hands rested an old yellowed letter, the paper worn soft with age. "I should have opened this years ago," he said hoarsely. "But I was afraid." Afraid of what? Of what I might find. Afraid of hoping for something that wasn't real. Abigail sat beside him on the old bench. "What is it?" "A letter from my father. He gave it to me before he died, back when Margaret was still alive and everything seemed right in the world." Jacob let out a bitter laugh. "He told me not to open it unless life became truly desperate. I suppose being evicted qualifies." He handed her the letter. Abigail read slowly, her eyes widening with every line. Jacob's father had owned land, a great deal of land, hidden deep within a valley nearly 3 days west of town. He had kept it secret for decades, paying taxes through a lawyer and never telling another soul. Inside the envelope was a deed, detailed directions, and a brief explanation. The valley had been his refuge, his secret, and now it belonged to Jacob. There was a cabin there, built by his father's own hands, and land so fertile that nearly anything planted in the soil flourished. Why keep it secret? Abigail asked quietly. "My father was a complicated man," Jacob replied. "When he was younger, He had debts and enemies, folks who would have taken everything from him. So he bought the property under another name and kept it hidden. He wanted me to have something nobody could ever steal away, but only when I truly needed it. Abigail studied her husband's face. Hope battled disbelief. Fear wrestled with possibility. "We should go," she said firmly. Jacob blinked. "Go. We should see it for ourselves. It might be nothing. Maybe the cabin could be ruined. Maybe the land could be worthless. Or," Abigail said, squeezing his hands, "it could be everything." Jacob stared at her. "We have nothing left to lose," she continued. "We're losing this place anyway. Let's take the girls and find out what your father left behind." For days later, the Walker family left Dry Creek. The trip took longer than expected because they traveled with children and carried all their possessions in a borrowed wagon. The townspeople watched them depart with pitying expressions and shaking heads. "They're running from their debts," someone muttered. "Those poor girls," another woman sighed, "dragged into the wilderness by foolish parents." But the girls saw things differently. Charlotte helped Abigail pack food for the trip. Rebecca collected wildflowers along the trail and pressed them between the pages of a book. Little Annie spent most of the journey singing cheerful songs in her sweet voice. Jacob followed his father's directions carefully, while Abigail watched the landscape transform around them. They left behind the farm surrounding Dry Creek. They crossed thick forests. They climbed rolling hills that seemed to stretch forever. At times, the trail nearly vanished altogether. Just when Abigail began wondering whether they had gotten lost, they crossed one final ridge. And there it was, the valley, spread before them like a scene from a dream. A sparkling river wound through its center beneath the afternoon sun. Tall grass waved in the breeze. Trees dotted the landscape. Protective hills surrounded the valley on every side. And near the river stood a cabin. Not the crumbling shack Abigail had feared. Though weathered by years, it stood strong and solid, built from sturdy timber, crafted by skilled hands. It was larger than the cabin they had left behind, complete with a broad porch and a stone chimney. Nearby stood the remains of an old garden that had grown wild over time. Fruit trees still bore signs of life, and a barn remained standing straight and strong. "Pa," Charlotte whispered as she grabbed her father's arm, "is all this really ours?" Jacob could not answer. He simply nodded. Tears streamed freely down his face. They spent their first evening exploring their newfound home in complete amazement. The inside of the cabin had remained remarkably well preserved. Jacob's father had built it to last. There were 2 comfortable bedrooms, a spacious main room with a stone fireplace, and even a small loft where the girls could sleep. Dust covered the furniture, but every table, chair, and cabinet remained sturdy and usable. For the first time in many months, the family went to bed feeling hopeful. The following days became a whirlwind of activity. They scrubbed every corner of the cabin until it gleamed. They repaired loose boards, patched small gaps, and cleaned years of dust from the windows. Soon the place began to feel like home. The garden proved even more surprising. The soil was dark, rich, and fertile. The nearby river supplied endless fresh water and plenty of fish. Inside the barn, Jacob discovered his father's old tools. Every hammer, shovel, and plow had been carefully stored and protected from the weather. Yet the greatest surprise came when they explored farther into the valley. One afternoon, while investigating the hills at the far end of the property, they discovered the reason Jacob's father had guarded the valley's secret so carefully. A silver vein ran through the rocky hillside. Even Abigail, who knew nothing about mining, could see the shining streaks in the stone. Jacob stared silently for a long time. Then he sat heavily on a large boulder. He was mining it, he said quietly. Abigail looked around. Now she noticed the subtle signs, small excavations hidden among the rocks, carefully disguised entrances, and old mining tools partially buried beneath years of brush. "Not heavily," Jacob continued. "Just enough to pay taxes and save money for me. That's how he managed to keep the property all those years." Abigail looked at the hillside. "What do we do now?" Jacob turned toward the river where the girls were laughing and skipping stones across the water. He looked at his daughters, then at his wife, then at the cabin waiting for them below. Finally, He looked across the endless fertile valley. "We live," he said. Abigail smiled. "We farm this land. We raise our girls here. And if we ever need extra money, we take only enough silver to get by." He paused. But quietly, Jacob nodded. "This isn't about becoming rich. It's about being free." And so that became their life. They planted crops in the fertile soil and were astonished by the harvests. Corn grew taller than Jacob's shoulders. Vegetables flourished. Fruit trees produced more than they could eat. What might have felt like isolation to others became peace for the Walker family. The girls thrived. Charlotte grew confident and responsible. Rebecca filled notebooks with sketches of flowers, birds, and mountains. Little Annie spent her days exploring the riverbanks and chasing butterflies through the meadows. Their cheeks became rosy. Their laughter came easily. The constant worry they once carried slowly disappeared. Occasionally, Jacob would take a small amount of silver to a trading post several towns away. He sold only enough to purchase supplies they could not produce themselves. No questions were asked. No attention was drawn. The money allowed them to improve their home, buy livestock, and save for the girls' futures. 2 years passed. Then one day, Charlotte announced she wanted to return to Dry Creek. At 12 years old, she missed some of her old friends and wanted to show them the flower collection she had gathered and the books she had been reading. Abigail immediately felt uneasy. The memories of gossip and judgment still lingered. But Jacob believed hiding forever was not the answer. So on a bright autumn morning, they hitched up their wagon and made the journey back to town. Everything about them had changed. The girls wore beautiful new dresses sewn by Abigail. Their faces were healthy and bright. The wagon itself was new and sturdy, purchased with careful savings. The horses were strong and well cared for. As soon as they entered Dry Creek, heads turned. Conversation stopped. People stared openly. Mrs. Whitmore nearly dropped her basket, scattering vegetables into the street. Jacob guided the wagon toward the general store. Abigail immediately noticed the expressions around them. The townspeople weren't looking at the same frightened family that had left 2 years earlier. They were seeing something entirely different. "Jacob Walker?" the storekeeper exclaimed as he stepped outside. His eyes widened. "Is that really you?" Jacob smiled. "It surely is, Mr. Cooper. We heard you left town." "We did. Folks said you were running from debts." Jacob remained calm. "We weren't running from anything. We want to claim land my father left me." The news spread through Dry Creek like wildfire. By the time the family finished shopping, a crowd had gathered outside the store. Abigail recognized many of the same women who had once mocked her. Now their faces held a strange mixture of curiosity, embarrassment, and envy. "Abigail," Mrs. Whitmore said sweetly as she approached. "My dear, you look wonderful. We were all so worried when you left." Abigail met her gaze steadily. "How thoughtful of you." The woman forced a smile. "As you can see, we're doing just fine." Another woman stepped forward eagerly. "That valley everyone keeps hearing about. What's it like?" Before Abigail could answer, Jacob wrapped an arm around her waist. "It's our home," he said. "It's peaceful, private, and provides everything we need. My father spent years preparing it for us, and we're grateful every day. But surely you'll return to town now," someone else suggested. "With resources like yours, you could become quite important around here." "We're happy where we are," Abigail replied gently but firmly. "We only came so the girls could visit friends, and so we could purchase supplies. The valley is our home now." At that moment, Annie tugged on Abigail's skirt. "Mama," she asked, "can we go home soon? I miss the river." The word "mama" spread the crowd like a ripple across still water. Abigail smiled and brushed Annie's hair back. "Soon, sweetheart." The crowd fell strangely silent. After finishing their business in town, the Walker family prepared to leave. As Jacob helped Abigail climb into the wagon, the town mayor approached. His expression carried the calculating look of a man already imagining opportunities. "Mr. Walker," he said, adjusting his coat, "if you've truly discovered valuable land, perhaps we ought to discuss certain arrangements. Investments, development. The town could benefit greatly." Jacob smiled politely. "There's nothing to discuss." The mayor blinked. "Surely you understand." The land belongs to our family, Jacob interrupted pleasantly but firmly. It was legally deeded to my father and passed down to me. We wish everyone well, but we prefer our privacy. The mayor's smile faded. I see. Jacob tipped his hat. Good day, Mayor. The family climbed aboard the wagon and began the long ride home. As Dry Creek slowly disappeared behind them, Abigail glanced back one last time. She saw Mrs. Whitmore standing with folded arms. She saw curious faces peering from shop windows. She saw envy, confusion, and frustration written plainly across many expressions. But more than anything, she saw how small it all seemed now. The gossip, the judgments, the assumptions, the belief that a person's worth could be measured by money, status, or the opinions of neighbors. Do you regret it? Jacob asked quietly as they traveled down the trail. Regret what? Leaving society behind, living so far from everyone. Abigail smiled. She looked at her husband. This good man had never promised her wealth. He had never offered status or comfort. Instead, he had offered partnership, honesty, love. Then she looked at the three girls sitting in the wagon. Though she had not given birth to them, they were her daughters in every way that mattered. Charlotte was reading one of her books. Rebecca was carefully pressing autumn leaves between pages. Annie was humming softly while watching clouds drift overhead. Finally, Abigail looked toward the distant mountains that hid their valley, the place waiting for them, the place that had become home. Not for a single moment, she answered. The girls eventually fell asleep during the journey. By evening, the wagon climbed the final ridge overlooking the valley. The moment Abigail saw it again, she felt the last traces of tension leave her shoulders. The river sparkled below. Smoke rose gently from the cabin chimney. The golden light of sunset bathed the valley in amber and gold. Do you think they'll come looking? Abigail asked. For what? The silver. Jacob shook his head. They don't know about it, and I intend to keep it that way. He guided the horses carefully down the slope. As far as anyone knows, we're simply successful farmers blessed with good land. Abigail smiled. Your father was wise. Jacob nodded. He always said the greatest wealth is the wealth nobody knows you possess. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun had nearly disappeared behind the western hills. Jacob carried sleeping Annie inside. Abigail helped Charlotte and Rebecca gather supplies from the wagon. Together they tucked the girls into their beds. Later that night, Abigail and Jacob stood on the porch beneath a sky filled with stars. The valley stretched before them, their hidden valley, their secret blessing, their hard-earned peace. Back in Dry Creek, people were probably still talking about them, speculating, wondering, perhaps even envying them. But none of that mattered here. If your father had been brave enough to keep this place, Abigail said softly, none of this would exist. Jacob wrapped an arm around her shoulders. He used to tell me something. What was that? He'd say that most folks spend their whole lives chasing shadows while standing in the sunlight. Abigail leaned against him. I think I understand what he meant. From inside the cabin came the familiar sounds of home, Annie murmuring in her sleep, Rebecca's gentle snoring, Charlotte turning over in her bed upstairs, the fireplace crackling warmly. Beyond the cabin walls, the river sang its endless song through the valley. Abigail thought about the woman she had been 2 years earlier, lonely, working long days for wages, accepting pity and judgment as though they were permanent parts of life. Then she remembered the day Jacob had knelt beneath the cottonwood tree. He had not offered rescue. He had not offered riches. He had not promised an easy life. He had simply offered honesty, partnership, and love. The people of Dry Creek had mocked her for marrying a poor widower with 3 daughters. They had whispered about her desperation. They had predicted misery and hardship. And perhaps, according to their narrow understanding of success, their doubts had seemed reasonable. But they never knew the full story. They never knew about the hidden valley. They never knew about the silver sleeping quietly beneath the hillside. They never knew about the fertile fields that produce abundance year after year. They never knew about the river that never ran dry. They never knew about the cabin built with a father's love and foresight. They never knew about the freedom that came from stepping away from society's expectations. Most importantly, they never understood the greatest treasure of all, the love of a good husband, the trust of 3 wonderful daughters, the satisfaction of building a meaningful life with one's own hands, the peace that came from living honestly without worrying about gossip, status, or public approval. As thousands of stars filled the night sky above the valley, Abigail smiled. Let the people of Dry Creek talk. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. Let them envy. Here in this hidden corner of the American frontier, she possessed everything she had never even known to dream about, and that, she realized, was worth far more than all the silver hidden in the hills. I love all of you, my wonderful audience of Wild West Tales. Tell me how this story made you feel. Leave a comment below. Type 1 if you love the story. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more epic tales from the wild.